Hello, have you ever felt the darkness whispering, calling your name from forgotten places? This is the story of the fear that changed me forever, of the grandfather who gave everything in the cursed Quinnimont mine, and of the creatures lurking below, waiting for those who dare to enter. Listen to my final confession and face the dark truth of our family. If this story chills and haunts you, please hit subscribe, give it a like, and leave a comment with your thoughts. The hospital room is cold, sterile, the kind of place where time feels like it's holding its breath. The recorder in my hands is old, its plastic cracked, buttons stiff from years of disuse. It hums faintly as I speak, a lifeline to you, son. The doc says I don't have long. Days, maybe weeks. I never thought I'd be telling you these stories, not like this, not with tubes in my arm and machines beeping in the background. But you're old enough now, and you deserve to know where you come from, what's in our blood. The world isn't what it seems. There are shadows out there, things that don't belong in the light, and I've seen them. This is the first story, the one that changed me. I hope you listen. I was 10, maybe 11 when it happened. We lived in a small town in West Virginia, tucked deep in the Appalachian mountains where the hills rolled like the spine of some ancient beast. The town was a speck on the map, clapboard houses, a general store, a church with a steeple that leaned like it was tired. The air always carried the smell of pine and coal dust, a reminder of the mines that kept the town alive. Our house was at the edge of it all, a sagging thing with a porch that groaned under every step. It was just me, Mom, and Dad most days, but that summer, Dad was gone. His brother, Uncle Ray, was sick, something bad, eating him from the inside, and Dad had driven 3 counties over to help. That left me and Mom, her working double shifts at the diner, her eyes heavy with worry about bills and Dad and everything else. My grandfather, Chester, lived a mile down the road in a cabin he'd built with his own hands. He was a mountain of a man, broad shoulders, hands like slabs of stone, a laugh that could shake the rafters. He'd worked the Quinnimont mine since he was a teenager, back when coal was the heartbeat of the valley. By the time I was a kid, the mine was old, its tunnels stretching deeper than anyone liked to talk about. Chester didn't say much about his work, but when he did, his voice would drop, his eyes looking past you, like he was seeing something in the dark. Mom said he'd spent too long underground, seen things that stuck with him. I didn't know what she meant, but I'd catch her watching him sometimes, like she was searching for answers he'd never give. That summer, Chester decided I was ready for man's work. I can still hear him, his voice rough as the gravel road we walked on. "Boy, you're old enough to know what it means to earn your keep," he said, leaning on the porch railing, his silhouette sharp against the morning sun. I was thrilled, honestly. Chester was a hero to me. His stories, his strength, the way he carried himself like the world couldn't touch him. I wanted to be like him, to prove I could handle whatever he threw at me. Mom wasn't so sure. She stood on the porch that morning, her arms crossed, her dark hair pulled back tight, her face a mix of trust and fear. "You keep a close eye on him, old man," she said, her voice sharp but trembling at the edges. She knelt and hugged me, her hands cold against my back, her heartbeat fast under her thin sweater. "Don't you let anything happen to my boy." Chester chuckled, a low rumble that seemed to shake the air. "He'll be fine, Mary. A day's work will toughen the kid up." He ruffled my hair, his calloused fingers rough but warm, and I grinned, feeling like I was about to step into one of his stories. Mom stayed on the porch as we walked away, her silhouette framed by the rising sun. I can still see her, hands gripping her elbows, eyes fixed on us like she could will us back. I didn't know it then, but that was the last morning I'd feel like a kid, the last time the world seemed safe. The road to town was a dusty path, winding through fields of tall grass and sycamore trees that leaned over like they were listening. The air was warm, thick with the hum of cicadas and the faint tang of coal smoke that clung to the valley. Chester walked with a steady stride, his work boots kicking up dust, his pickaxe slung over one shoulder like it was part of him. I had to jog to keep up, my sneakers scuffing the dirt, my backpack bouncing with the weight of a water bottle and a sandwich Mom had packed. It made me feel important, like I was already a miner, ready for whatever lay ahead. "Grandpa, is the mine safe?" I asked, my voice barely carrying over the cicadas. He didn't answer right away, his eyes fixed on the road. "Nothing in life's safe, kid," he said finally, his voice low, like he was weighing every word. "You got machines that can crush you, tunnels that can cave in, air that can choke you if you're not careful, but you're my blood. Long as I'm breathing, I've got you." His words hit me like a stone, not just reassuring, but heavy with something I couldn't name. He clapped a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm, and gave me a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I nodded, trying to look brave, but my stomach twisted. I'd heard whispers about the Quinnimont mine, stories from kids at school about men who went down and never came back, about strange noises in the dark. But Chester was untouchable, wasn't he? He'd worked those tunnels for years, and he was still here, still strong. Town was a cluster of tired buildings, a general store with a sagging roof, a gas station with one pump, a church with paint peeling like old skin. A pickup truck waited for us, an old Ford with rust creeping up its sides, driven by Hank, a wiry guy from the mine's surface crew. He had a cigarette dangling from his lips, his eyes hidden behind sunglasses that reflected the sky. "Chester, you sure about the kid?" he asked, glancing at me like I was a stray. "He's fine," Chester said, his tone shutting down any argument. He hoisted me into the truck bed, where I sat on a pile of tarps, the metal hot against my legs. Chester climbed in beside me, and Hank gunned the engine, sending us rattling up the road toward the mine. The Quinnimont mine was a wound in the hillside, its entrance a black void framed by rusted beams and faded signs. Old machinery littered the area, broken carts, rusted conveyors, stacks of rotting timber, like the bones of a forgotten giant. A chain-link fence circled the site, sagging and useless, as if it knew it couldn't keep out what lived below. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of coal dust and damp rock, and something else, sharp, almost metallic, like blood or rust. I couldn't place it, but it made my skin prickle. Hank parked near the main shaft, where a handful of miners were gathered, their helmets glinting in the sun. I recognized a few from Sunday dinners at our house, men whose laughter had filled our kitchen. Today, they were quiet, their eyes flicking toward the mine's entrance like it was a living thing. Chester introduced me to two of them, Williams, a burly man with a graying beard and scars crisscrossing his hands, and Johnny, a lanky guy in his early 20s with a nervous grin and a helmet that kept slipping over his eyes. "Kids coming with us?" Williams asked, his voice rough but not unkind. He looked me over, then nodded, like I'd passed some test. Johnny laughed, adjusting his helmet. "Hope you're ready to get dirty, little man." I grinned, trying to hide the flutter in my chest. Chester handed me a helmet, heavy and scratched with a light strapped to the front. He adjusted the strap under my chin, his fingers careful despite their roughness. "Keep this on," he said, his voice firm. "No matter what." I nodded, the helmet's weight pressing on my neck. The light flickered when I moved, casting a weak beam across the ground. I felt like an explorer, like I was stepping into one of those adventure books I loved. But this was real, and the darkness waiting for us wasn't just a story. The elevator was a metal cage, its bars rusted, the floor gritty with dirt. A big man, whose name I never learned, stood outside, his hands on the controls. He was huge, his face shadowed under a wide-brimmed hat, his arms like tree trunks. He didn't speak, just nodded at Chester and slammed the grate shut with a clang that echoed through me. The four of us, me, Chester, Williams and Johnny, stood close, our breaths loud in the tight space. I could smell sweat and tobacco, the faint tang of metal from their tools. Chester put a hand on my shoulder, steadying me as the elevator lurched. "Eyes forward," he said softly. "Don't look down." I didn't understand until we started descending, the gears screeching like something wounded. The walls of the shaft slid by, rough and streaked with coal, glinting in the dim light. It felt like the earth was swallowing us, pulling us into its depths. The air grew colder, damper, pressing against my skin. I glanced at Chester, but his face was a mask, his eyes fixed on the darkness below. Johnny shifted, his pickaxe clinking against the cage. Williams stared ahead, his jaw tight. I wanted to ask questions. How deep were we going? What was it like down there? But their silence stopped me. It wasn't just nerves, it was like they knew something, like they'd seen things they didn't share. The elevator groaned, the sound vibrating through the shaft. I watched the walls, the cracks and swirls in the rock looking almost alive, like the stone was breathing. The descent felt endless, the light from the surface shrinking to a speck. The air thickened, carrying that metallic smell again, now mixed with something sour, ancient, like decay trapped in stone. My helmet light flickered, and I tapped it, my heart jumping when it steadied. Chester noticed and gave me a nod, his eyes softening. "You're doing fine," he said, his voice low. "Just stay close." I nodded, clutching my backpack. The elevator slowed, gears grinding, and with a jolt, we hit bottom. The big man's shadow loomed as he opened the grate, the sound scraping through the silence. We stepped out into the darkness, the cold seeping into my bones. The mine felt alive, its walls watching, its air whispering. Chester took my hand, his grip firm. "Stick with me," he said, his voice carrying a warning I didn't yet understand. The tunnel stretched ahead, lit by faint bulbs that barely pushed back the black. I followed, my sneakers scuffing the dirt, my heart pounding with excitement and dread. This was man's work, he'd said. But as we moved deeper, I felt it. Something else was down here, waiting in the dark. The elevator's grate slammed shut behind us, the sound ringing in my ears like a gunshot. The big man outside, his face still shadowed under that wide-brimmed hat, gave a curt nod to Chester before stepping back to the controls. I stood close to my grandfather, my sneakers scuffing the gritty floor of the cage, my heart thumping so loud I was sure the others could hear it. Chester, Williams and Johnny filled the small space, their shoulders brushing against each other, their breaths heavy in the damp air. The smell of sweat, tobacco and metal hung around us, mixing with that sharp, metallic tang I'd noticed up top. Stronger now, like rust and something older, something alive. My helmet light flickered, casting jittery beams across the rusted bars, and I tapped it, my fingers clumsy with nerves. Chester's hand rested on my shoulder, steady as ever. "Eyes forward," he said again, his voice low, almost swallowed by the groan of the elevator as it lurched downward. I nodded, but my eyes darted to the walls of the shaft, rough and streaked with coal, glinting like wet skin in the dim light. The cage rattled, the gears above screeching like a wounded animal, and I felt the earth pulling us in deeper and deeper, as if it had been waiting for us all along. I glanced at the others. Williams stood rigid, his scarred hands gripping his pickaxe, his jaw tight like he was chewing on something bitter. Johnny, the youngest of the group, shifted his weight, his helmet slipping slightly, his nervous grin gone. He kept glancing at the walls, his light darting like he was looking for something, or afraid of finding it. I wanted to ask what was wrong, why they were so quiet, but the weight of the silence stopped me. It wasn't just the usual tension of a hard day's work. It was something deeper, like they'd seen things down here they didn't talk about, things they carried in their bones. The descent felt like it lasted hours, though it couldn't have been more than a few minutes. The light from the surface shrank to a pinprick above us, then vanished entirely, leaving only the weak glow of our helmet lights and the faint bulbs strung along the shaft. The air grew colder, heavier, pressing against my skin like damp cloth. That metallic smell sharpened, now mixed with something sour, almost like rot, as if the earth itself was decaying around us. My stomach twisted, not just from the motion of the elevator, but from a feeling I couldn't shake. A sense that we were crossing into a place where we didn't belong, where the rules of the world above didn't apply. I looked up at Chester, hoping for reassurance, but his face was unreadable, his eyes fixed on the darkness below. His hand tightened on my shoulder, not hard, but firm, like he was anchoring me to him. "You're doing fine, kid," he said, his voice softer now, almost gentle. "Just stay close." I nodded, clutching my backpack, the weight of Mum's sandwich and water bottle grounding me. The elevator groaned again, the sound vibrating through my chest, and I tried to focus on the walls, on the patterns in the rock, swirls and cracks that looked almost alive, like veins pulsing under the surface. I told myself it was just my imagination, just the flicker of my light playing tricks, but the feeling grew stronger. The mine wasn't just a place, it was something else, something watching us. Johnny broke the silence, his voice high and forced. "How deep we going today, Chester?" He tried to sound casual, but there was an edge to it, like he was filling the quiet to keep something at bay. "Same as always," Chester said, not looking at him. "Far enough to get the job done." Williams grunted, his voice low. "Long as we don't hit that bad vein again." He didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask, but the way he said it made my skin prickle. I wanted to know what he meant, what made a vein bad, but Chester's grip on my shoulder tightened, a silent warning to stay quiet. The elevator slowed, the gears grinding louder, and with a final jolt, we hit bottom. The big man's shadow loomed outside as he slid the grate open, the screech of metal echoing through the tunnel. We stepped out, and the cold hit me like a slap, seeping through my jacket and into my bones. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of damp stone and coal dust, and that sour metallic tang was stronger now, almost choking. My helmet light swept across the tunnel, catching glimpses of rough walls and scattered debris. Broken tools, chunks of rock, a rusted bucket half buried in the dirt. The bulbs strung along the ceiling every 15 feet or so cast a sickly yellow glow, but they barely pushed back the darkness. I'd never known what real darkness was until that moment. It wasn't just the absence of light, it was a presence, a weight that pressed against you, like the mine was swallowing the light itself. Chester kept me close, his hand still on my shoulder as we moved forward. The tunnel split into two paths, one veering left, the other right, both disappearing into the gloom. Williams and Johnny adjusted their helmets, their lights cutting sharp beams through the dust. "We'll take the left," Williams said, his voice gruff. "You and the kid got the right?" Chester nodded. "Yeah, stay sharp." Johnny gave me a quick grin, but it was strained, like he was trying to convince himself everything was fine. "See you topside, little man," he said, then followed Williams into the left tunnel, their lights fading into the dark. Chester led me to the right, his boots crunching on the dirt floor. The tunnel was narrower than I'd expected, the walls close enough that I could touch both sides if I stretched out my arms. The bulbs flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to move when I wasn't looking. I tried to focus on Chester's back, on the steady rhythm of his steps, but my eyes kept drifting to the walls. They were pocked with cracks and crevices, some small, others wide enough to slip into, their depths lost in darkness. I wondered what could live down here, so far from the sun, in a place where the air felt like it was holding its breath. "Grandpa," I said, my voice small, "is anything alive down here?" He stopped, just for a moment, his shoulders stiffening. Then he turned, his helmet light catching my face, making me squint. "Rats, maybe," he said, his tone flat. "Nothing you need to worry about. Just stick with me and do what I say." I nodded, but his answer didn't sit right. It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it, like he was holding something back. I remembered Mum's face that morning, the worry in her eyes, and I wondered if she knew something I didn't, something Chester wasn't telling me. He handed me a small pickaxe, its handle worn smooth from years of use. "Start there," he said, pointing to a coal seam in the wall, a black ribbon that gleamed faintly in the light. "Swing hard, but don't overdo it. Let the tool do the work." I gripped the pickaxe, its weight heavier than I'd expected, and swung at the wall. The impact jarred my arms, but a small chunk of coal broke free, tumbling to the floor. I grinned, feeling a spark of pride. Chester nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips, and started working beside me, his swings steady and precise, like he'd done this 1,000 times. The sound of metal on stone filled the tunnel, a rhythmic clink that echoed off the walls, almost comforting in its regularity. We worked for hours, or what felt like hours, the time blurring in the dim light. My arms ached, my hands blistered, but there was something satisfying about it, chipping away at the earth, side by side with Chester, like I was part of something bigger. We took breaks now and then, sitting on a pile of rocks to drink water from my bottle or share a piece of Mom's sandwich. Chester told me stories as we rested, his voice low and steady, tales of his early days in the mine, of men he'd worked with, of close calls with cave-ins or gas leaks, but he never mentioned anything strange, anything like what Williams had hinted at, and I didn't ask. I didn't want to break the spell, the feeling that I was finally seeing the man he was, the world he lived in. The tunnel seemed to change as we worked, though I couldn't say how. The air grew heavier, the shadows deeper, the bulbs flickering more often. I noticed things, small things that set my nerves on edge. A faint scratching sound like claws on stone coming from one of the crevices. a sudden chill, like a draft from somewhere deeper in the mine. Once, I thought I saw something move in the corner of my light, a shape that vanished when I turned to look. I told myself it was the dark playing tricks, but my heart beat faster, and I stayed closer to Chester, his presence the only thing keeping me steady. He noticed, of course. He always did. "You're doing good, kid," he said during one break, his voice softer than usual. He handed me the water bottle, his eyes searching my face. "This place, it gets to you sometimes. Makes you see things, hear things. Just focus on the work and you'll be fine." I nodded, but his words didn't ease the knot in my stomach. I wanted to ask about the noises, the shadows, the bad vein Williams had mentioned, but something in his eyes stopped me, a warning, or maybe fear, buried deep where he thought I couldn't see it. I took a sip of water, the taste flat and metallic, and went back to work, swinging my pickaxe harder, as if I could drive away the unease with every strike. The morning passed in a haze of effort and dust, the tunnel filling with the sharp scent of broken coal. My helmet light grew dimmer, or maybe it was the darkness pressing in, swallowing the glow. I kept glancing at the crevices, their black mouths seeming to widen as we worked, like they were waiting for something to crawl out. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was tired, that the mine was just a mine. But deep down, I knew better. This place wasn't right. It was alive in a way I couldn't explain, and we were intruders chipping away at its heart. I was about to ask Chester if we could stop for lunch, my stomach growling, when a low rumble shook the ground. It was faint at first, like distant thunder, but it grew louder, vibrating through the walls and into my bones. Dust trickled from the ceiling, pattering on my helmet like rain. I froze, my pickaxe half raised, my eyes darting to Chester. His face changed, eyes wide, jaw tight, a look I'd never seen before, fear, raw and real. "Get back," he said, his voice sharp. And before I could move, he grabbed my arm and pulled me toward a crevice in the wall, his body shielding me as the world began to shake. The ground shuddered beneath my feet, a low growl that grew into a roar, like the earth itself was tearing open. Dust rained from the ceiling, thick and choking, coating my face, stinging my eyes until they watered. The tunnel's bulbs flickered wildly, some popping with sharp cracks, plunging us into deeper shadow. My pickaxe slipped from my hands, clattering to the dirt, and I stood frozen, my heart slamming against my ribs. Chester's face, usually so steady, twisted with something new, fear, raw and sharp, like he'd seen the devil himself. Before I could make a sound, he grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in, and pulled me toward a crevice in the wall. The tunnel groaned, rocks crashing around us, some small, others heavy enough to shake the floor. Chester shoved me into the gap, his body a shield as he braced against the opening, his breath ragged, his shoulders trembling under the weight of falling stone. "Stay down," he barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. I curled into the crevice, the jagged walls scraping my back, my helmet light bouncing wildly as my hands shook. The air was a haze of dust, burning my throat with every breath, tasting of coal and something sharp, like rusted iron. The mine shook for what felt like forever, the rumble vibrating through my bones, the walls screaming as if they were alive. Chester grunted as a rock hit his back, but he didn't move, didn't let the crevice collapse on me. I wanted to scream, to tell him to get in with me, but my voice was trapped, my body locked in terror. Then silence. Heavy, suffocating, worse than the noise. The dust hung thick, swirling in the dim glow of my light, making the tunnel feel like a tomb. I coughed, my lungs aching, and peered up at Chester. His face was streaked with grime, his eyes scanning the darkness, alert, like a hunter waiting for the next strike. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead, dark against his pale skin, but he didn't seem to notice. "You hurt?" he asked, his voice rough but calm, like he was forcing himself to stay steady for me. He turned, brushing dust from my jacket, his hands gentle despite their strength. I shook my head, my throat too tight to speak, my legs wobbling like they might give out. The crevice had saved me, its narrow walls a shield against the cave-in. Chester had saved me. "We gotta find Will and Johnny," he said, pulling me out of the gap. The tunnel was a wreck, rocks scattered across the floor, some fist-sized, others big enough to crush a man. The bulbs overhead flickered, casting jagged shadows that seemed to shift when I blinked. My light swept the walls, catching new cracks, some wide enough to slide into, their depths swallowed by black. That sour metallic smell was stronger now, thick and cloying, like blood mixed with rot. It clung to my tongue, made my stomach twist, and I fought the urge to gag. Chester took my hand, his grip firm, grounding me as we moved back toward the fork where the tunnels split. Every step crunched on debris, the sound echoing in the stillness, too loud, like we were announcing ourselves to something listening. My eyes darted to the crevices, their dark mouths seeming to widen, to breathe. The mine didn't feel like a place anymore. It felt alive, angry, like we'd woken something by digging too deep. I thought of Williams's cryptic talk of the bad vein, Chester's silence when I'd asked about it, and a cold dread settled in my chest. What weren't they telling me? We reached the fork, the air so thick with dust it was like wading through fog. Chester stopped, his helmet light sweeping the entrance to the left tunnel, where Williams and Johnny had gone. "Will! Johnny!" he called, his voice sharp, echoing off the walls. No answer, just the drip of water, faint and far away, like the mine was mocking us. He called again, louder, his voice cracking with something desperate. The silence pressed back, heavy, wrong, like the air itself was holding its breath. My hands trembled, my light shaking as I clutched Chester's arm. He looked down at me, his face hard but his eyes soft, like he was trying to shield me from his own fear. "Stay right behind me," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper, like he didn't want the mine to hear. We stepped into the left tunnel, the dust swirling around us, making every breath a struggle. The passage sloped downward, narrower than ours, the walls closing in until I could almost touch both sides. The bulbs were sparse, some shattered, leaving long stretches of shadow that my light couldn't pierce. My sneakers slipped on loose gravel, and I clung to Chester, his warmth, the only thing keeping me from bolting. The air grew colder, the metallic smell so thick it coated my throat, mixed with that sour rot that seemed to seep from the walls. I wanted to ask what had caused the cave-in, what was down here. But Chester's tense silence stopped me. He was listening, his head tilted, his eyes scanning the dark like he was waiting for something to strike. The tunnel curved, opening into a wider chamber where the coal seam thickened, the walls black and slick, gleaming like wet skin. My light swept across the space and I stopped dead, my breath catching. There they were, Williams and Johnny sprawled on the ground, surrounded by broken rock and scattered tools. My heart leapt, hoping they were okay, but the sight of them twisted my insides, Williams was still, his body crushed under a massive boulder, his helmet split open, blood pooling beneath him, dark and thick, soaking into the dirt. His scarred hands lay limp, his eyes open, staring blankly at the ceiling. "Will," Chester whispered, his voice breaking. He knelt beside the older man, his fingers searching for a pulse, but his shoulders sagged, his face grim. "He's gone." I stared, my mouth dry, my mind struggling to make sense of it. Williams had been alive that morning, his gruff voice teasing me, his presence solid and sure. Now he was gone, just like that, the mine claiming him like it had so many others. I wanted to look away, but my eyes drifted to Johnny, and what I saw froze the air in my lungs. Johnny was alive, his chest rising in shallow, uneven breaths, his face pale, his eyes wide and unblinking, locked on the ceiling. But something was on him, crouched over his chest, pinning him to the ground. It was like a spider, but wrong, half the size of a man with too many legs, thin and hairy, splayed across Johnny's body. Its face was the worst part, not an animal's, but human-like, twisted, with black eyes that glinted like polished stone, swallowing the light. Its mouth was a jagged gash, filled with needle-sharp fangs that dripped with something dark. Blood or venom, I couldn't tell. It was feeding, its fangs buried in Johnny's chest, and he didn't move, didn't scream, just lay there, paralyzed, his face a mask of silent horror. My knees buckled, my helmet light trembling as my hands shook. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The sight of that thing burning into my mind. The wet, sucking sounds it made as it fed turned my stomach, and I fought the urge to vomit. Chester stood slowly, his pickaxe gripped tight, his face pale but resolute, like he'd known this was coming, like he'd always known.
"What?" he whispered, his voice barely audible, but it was enough. The creature's head snapped up, its black eyes locking onto us, its face twisting into something feral, something ancient. It let out a screech, sharp, piercing, like metal dragged across bone, echoing through the chamber until my ears rang. The sound wasn't just noise, it was a warning, a claim, like the mine itself was telling us we didn't belong. Chester shoved me behind him, his body a wall between me and the thing. "Run!" he roared, his voice slicing through my terror. I stumbled back, my sneakers slipping on the gravel, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. I wanted to obey, to run, but my legs were led, my eyes locked on the creature, its legs twitching, its eyes glinting with hunger. It moved faster than anything that size should be, lunging at Chester with its fangs bared. He swung his pickaxe, the blade catching it in the side, tearing into its glistening abdomen. The creature screamed, a sound that clawed at my mind, and black ichor sprayed, hissing as it hit the ground. It didn't stop though, it threw itself at Chester, its fangs sinking into his shoulder. He grunted, staggering, but drove the pickaxe deeper, his face twisted with pain and defiance. The thing shrieked again, flailing, and flung him against the wall with a force that cracked the stone. Chester slid to the ground, his pickaxe clattering beside him, his body limp. The creature's eyes turned to me, black and endless, like they could see through me. Terror surged hot and sharp, breaking the spell. I turned and ran, my helmet light bouncing, the tunnel a blur of shadows and dust. The patter of its legs followed, fast and relentless, closing in. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but I didn't stop, didn't look back. The fork was ahead, the right tunnel leading to the elevator, my only hope. I didn't know if Chester was alive, if Johnny was dead, but I knew I had to keep moving. The elevator loomed, its rusted cage a faint outline in the dark. I slammed into it, my hands fumbling with the grate, my fingers slipping on the cold metal. The pattering grew louder, closer, and I glanced back, my light catching the creature's twisted face, its legs a blur. I yanked the grate down, my arms shaking, but one of its limbs slipped through, hairy and sharp, brushing my skin. I screamed, scrambling up the cage's bars, my back pressed against the ceiling, trapped. Then I saw Chester, bloodied and staggering, his face a mask of pain and rage. He was alive. He raised his pickaxe, his movement slow, and drove it into the creature's neck. It shrieked, thrashing, its limb jerking back as he struck again, black ichor splattering the dirt. The thing collapsed, its legs twitching, then went still. Chester stumbled to the elevator, blood soaking his shoulder, his breath ragged. He slammed the grate shut, his hands trembling. "What are you doing?" I cried, tears streaming down my face. "No time," he gasped, his eyes wild, darting to the tunnel. "There's more of them." He hit the button, and the elevator lurched upward, the gears screeching. I screamed for him to come with me, my voice breaking, but he was already limping away, his body swaying, the venom slowing him down. He reached a supply crate, his hands fumbling for a stick of dynamite, and lit a match, his face pale but determined. The elevator lurched upward, its gears screeching like a wounded animal, the rusted cage rattling around me. I clung to the bars, my hands slick with sweat, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. Chester's face, pale and bloodied, was the last thing I saw before the darkness of the shaft swallowed him. His forced smile, that familiar wink, burned into my mind, a promise and a goodbye all at once. I screamed his name, my voice breaking, tears streaming down my dust-caked face, but the mind's walls threw my words back, mocking me with echoes. He was still down there, limping, venom slowing his movements, a stick of dynamite in his trembling hand. I knew what he was planning, and it tore me apart. The creature's hairy limb had brushed my arm, its touch cold and sharp, like a blade wrapped in bristles. It lay dead now, its black ichor pooling on the dirt below, but Chester's words echoed in my head. "There's more of them." The thought sent a shiver through me, colder than the damp air of the shaft. My helmet light flickered, casting jittery beams across the jagged walls, the coal veins glinting like eyes watching me ascend. The elevator groaned, slow and unsteady, as if the mine itself was fighting to keep me. I pressed my back against the cage, my sneakers slipping on the gritty floor, my breath hitching with every creak of the gears. "What?" he whispered, his voice barely audible, but it was enough. The creature's head snapped up, its black eyes locking onto us, its face twisting into something feral, something ancient. It let out a screech, sharp, piercing, like metal dragged across bone, echoing through the chamber until my ears rang. The sound wasn't just noise, it was a warning, a claim, like the mine itself was telling us we didn't belong. Chester shoved me behind him, his body a wall between me and the thing. "Run!" he roared, his voice slicing through my terror. I stumbled back, my sneakers slipping on the gravel, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. I wanted to obey, to run, but my legs were led, my eyes locked on the creature, its legs twitching, its eyes glinting with hunger. It moved faster than anything that size should be, lunging at Chester with its fangs bared. He swung his pickaxe, the blade catching it in the side, tearing into its glistening abdomen. the creature screamed, a sound that clawed at my mind, and black ichor sprayed, hissing as it hit the ground. It didn't stop though, it threw itself at Chester, its fangs sinking into his shoulder. He grunted, staggering, but drove the pickaxe deeper, his face twisted with pain and defiance. The thing shrieked again, flailing, and flung him against the wall with a force that cracked the stone. Chester slid to the ground, his pickaxe clattering beside him, his body limp. The creature's eyes turned to me, black and endless, like they could see through me. Terror surged hot and sharp, breaking the spell. I turned and ran, my helmet light bouncing, the tunnel a blur of shadows and dust. The patter of its legs followed, fast and relentless, closing in. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but I didn't stop, didn't look back. The fork was ahead, the right tunnel leading to the elevator, my only hope. I didn't know if Chester was alive, if Johnny was dead, but I knew I had to keep moving. The elevator loomed, its rusted cage a faint outline in the dark. I slammed into it, my hands fumbling with the grate, my fingers slipping on the cold metal. The pattering grew louder, closer, and I glanced back, my light catching the creature's twisted face, its legs a blur. I yanked the grate down, my arms shaking, but one of its limbs slipped through, hairy and sharp, brushing my skin. I screamed, scrambling up the cage's bars, my back pressed against the ceiling, trapped. Then I saw Chester, bloodied and staggering, his face a mask of pain and rage. He was alive. He raised his pickaxe, his movement slow, and drove it into the creature's neck. It shrieked, thrashing, its limb jerking back as he struck again, black ichor splattering the dirt. The thing collapsed, its legs twitching, then went still. Chester stumbled to the elevator, blood soaking his shoulder, his breath ragged. He slammed the grate shut, his hands trembling. "What are you doing?" I cried, tears streaming down my face. "No time," he gasped, his eyes wild, darting to the tunnel. "There's more of them!" He hit the button, and the elevator lurched upward, the gears screeching. I screamed for him to come with me, my voice breaking, but he was already limping away, his body swaying, the venom slowing him down. He reached a supply crate, his hands fumbling for a stick of dynamite, and lit a match, his face pale but determined. The elevator lurched upward, its gears screeching like a wounded animal, the rusted cage rattling around me. I clung to the bars, my hands slick with sweat, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. Chester's face, pale and bloodied, was the last thing I saw before the darkness of the shaft swallowed him. His forced smile, that familiar wink, burned into my mind, a promise and a goodbye all at once. I screamed his name, my voice breaking, tears streaming down my dust-caked face, but the mind's walls threw my words back, mocking me with echoes. He was still down there, limping, venom slowing his movements, a stick of dynamite in his trembling hand. I knew what he was planning, and it tore me apart. The creature's hairy limb had brushed my arm, its touch cold and sharp, like a blade wrapped in bristles. It lay dead now, its black ichor pooling on the dirt below, but Chester's words echoed in my head. "There's more of them." The thought sent a shiver through me, colder than the damp air of the shaft. My helmet light flickered, casting jittery beams across the jagged walls, the coal veins glinting like eyes watching me ascend. The elevator groaned, slow and unsteady, as if the mine itself was fighting to keep me. I pressed my back against the cage, my sneakers slipping on the gritty floor, my breath hitching with every creak of the gears.
I couldn't stop seeing Johnny's face, pale, paralyzed, those black eyes staring blankly as the creature fed on him. Williams, crushed under the boulder, his blood soaking the dirt, and Chester, staggering, his shoulder torn open, his pickaxe dripping with the creature's ichor. I wanted to believe he could make it, that he'd climb into another elevator, that he'd be waiting for me topside with that gruff laugh, ready to tell Mum I'd done all right. But deep down, I knew he wasn't coming with me. The elevator shook, a sudden jolt that threw me against the bars. My helmet light flickered again, then died, plunging me into darkness so complete it felt like a weight on my chest. I fumbled with the switch, my fingers trembling, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The light sputtered back on, weak and unsteady, and I swept it across the shaft. The walls seemed closer now, the cracks wider, like the mine was breathing, shifting, alive. A faint scratching sound came from below, faint but growing louder, like claws on stone. My stomach dropped, more of them. I looked down through the cage's floor, my light barely piercing the black. Something moved, a flicker of legs, too many, skittering up the shaft. My scream caught in my throat and I scrambled higher, climbing the bars until my back hit the ceiling. The elevator groaned, its ascent agonizingly slow, the gears grinding as if they might give out. The scratching grew louder, closer, a rapid patter that sent my heart racing. I swung my light downward, and there it was, a shape, spider-like but wrong, its human-like face glinting in the beam, its black eyes locked on me. It was climbing the shaft, its legs digging into the rock, moving faster than the elevator. I kicked at the bars, my sneakers useless against the rusted metal, my voice a raw sob. "Chester!" I screamed, knowing he couldn't hear me, knowing he was fighting his own battle below. The creature's screech filled the shaft, sharp and piercing, like a blade in my ears. It was closer now, its legs scraping the cage's underside, the sound vibrating through the metal. I swung my small pickaxe, the one Chester had given me, aiming blindly through the bars. The blade caught something, flesh maybe, or one of those hairy limbs, and the creature shrieked again, its body jerking back. Black ichor sprayed, hissing as it hit the cage, burning my hand where it splattered. The elevator lurched again, climbing higher, but the creature didn't stop. It clung to the cage, its face pressing against the bars, those black eyes boring into me, its mouth opened, revealing jagged fangs dripping with venom, and I swung the pickaxe again, my arms burning with effort. The blade struck its head, and it recoiled, its legs flailing, but it didn't fall. It was too strong, too fast, and I was trapped, nowhere to go. Then I heard it, a low, distant boom, muffled but powerful, shaking the shaft. Dust and pebbles rained down, and the creature froze, its head snapping toward the sound. Another boom followed, louder, and the walls trembled, cracks widening. Chester. It had to be him, the dynamite, his final stand. The creature screeched, a sound of rage and pain, and scrambled downward, disappearing into the dark. I slumped against the bars, my breath ragged, my hands shaking so hard I dropped the pickaxe. It clattered through the cage's floor, lost to the shaft below. The elevator kept climbing, its groans louder now, the gears straining under the weight of the shaking mine. I pressed my face against the bars, tears mixing with the dust on my cheeks, and whispered Chester's name, a prayer, a plea. I didn't know if he was alive, if the dynamite had been enough, but I knew he'd done it for me, to give me a chance. The metallic smell was gone now, replaced by the sharp tang of smoke drifting up from below. The mine was fighting back, its walls shuddering, its air thick with the promise of collapse. The surface came into view, a faint circle of light above, growing larger but still so far. The elevator shook harder, and I braced myself, my hands gripping the bars, my body tense. Another tremor hit, stronger, and a crack split the shaft wall, sending rocks tumbling past. I screamed, the sound lost in the mine's roar, and curled into a ball, my helmet light flickering, the darkness closing in. I thought of Mom, waiting at home, her arms crossed, her eyes full of worry. I thought of Dad, miles away, not knowing I was here. And I thought of Chester, down there, alone, fighting things that shouldn't exist. The elevator reached the top, the grate screeching open, as the big man, Hank, the surface crew guy, grabbed my arm and pulled me out. I stumbled onto the ground, my legs giving out, my breath coming in sobs. "Chester!" I screamed, pointing at the shaft. "He's still down there. You gotta help him." Hank's face was grim, his sunglasses reflecting the morning sun. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at the mine's entrance as another tremor shook the ground, deeper, more final. The air filled with the sound of collapsing stone, a deafening roar that drowned out my cries. Dust billowed from the shaft, thick and grey, and I knew in that moment that Chester wasn't coming back. The ground shook beneath me, a final bone-rattling tremor that sent dust and pebbles cascading from the mine's entrance. I lay on the dirt, my body trembling, my breath coming in ragged sobs as Hank held me back, his grip tight on my arm. The roar of the collapse filled the air, a deafening wave that drowned out my screams for Chester. The shaft spewed grey dust, thick and choking, like the mine was exhaling its last breath. I knew what it meant. Chester had lit the dynamite, blown the tunnel, sacrificed himself to keep those things, whatever they were, from reaching the surface. I clawed at Hank's hand, desperate to run back, to find him, but he held firm, his face grim, his eyes hidden behind those damn sunglasses. "Kid, he's gone," Hank said, his voice low, almost lost in the fading rumble. I shook my head, tears cutting tracks through the dust on my face, my voice hoarse from screaming. "No, he's still down there. We have to get him." But Hank didn't move, didn't let go, and the other surface workers stood silent, their faces pale, staring at the mine like it was a grave. The air was thick with smoke now, the sharp tang of explosives mixing with the coal dust, burning my lungs. My helmet light flickered, useless on the ground where I'd dropped it, its beam catching the swirling dust. The mine's entrance was a black void, sealed by the collapse, its rusted beams bent and twisted like broken bones. I sank to my knees, my hands digging into the dirt, my mind replaying Chester's final moments, his bloodied shoulder, his trembling hands, that forced smile and wink. He'd known he wasn't coming back. He'd done it for me, to keep me safe, maybe to keep the whole town safe. Hank pulled me to my feet, his grip gentler now, and led me away from the shaft. The other workers moved slowly, their boots crunching on gravel, their voices low as they muttered about the cave-in, about gas leaks or faulty supports, anything to explain what had happened without admitting the truth. I wanted to scream at them, to tell them about the creature, its twisted face, its black eyes, the way it had fed on Johnny, but my throat was raw, my words trapped, and their faces told me they wouldn't believe me, or maybe they didn't want to. We reached the edge of the mining site, where the rusted fence sagged under the weight of years. The sun was high now, its light harsh against my stinging eyes, but it felt wrong, like it didn't belong after what I'd seen. The valley stretched out below, the hills rolling green and quiet, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. I was different, the world was different, and Chester was gone. Hank drove me back to town, the old Ford rattling along the winding road. I sat in the truck bed, my back against the tarps, staring at the hills, trying to hold on to Chester's face, his voice, his strength. The memory of the creature kept pushing in, its screech, its legs, the way it had looked at me like I was prey. I shivered despite the warmth of the day and hugged my knees, my backpack heavy with Mum's uneaten sandwich. I wanted to be home, to see her, to feel her arms around me, but I dreaded telling her what had happened, what I'd seen. When we pulled up to the house, Mum was on the porch, her arms crossed, her face pale. She must have heard the sirens, seen the dust cloud from the mine. She ran to me as I climbed out of the truck, her hands grabbing my shoulders, her eyes searching my face. "Where's Chester?" she asked, her voice sharp, trembling. I opened my mouth, but no words came, only a sob. Her face crumpled, and she pulled me into her arms, holding me so tight I could barely breathe. Hank spoke for me, his voice low. "Cave in, Chester. He didn't make it." Mum's grip tightened, her breath hitching, but she didn't cry, not then. She thanked Hank, her voice flat, and led me inside. The house felt too quiet, too empty. The creak of the floorboards loud in the silence. She sat me at the kitchen table, her hands shaking as she poured me water, her eyes red but dry. I told her everything. The cave-in, the creature, Johnny's paralysis, William's death, Chester's fight, the dynamite. My words tumbled out, broken and messy, my voice cracking with every detail. I expected her to tell me I was imagining things, that fear had twisted my mind, but she just listened, her face still, her hands clenched in her lap. When I finished, she reached across the table and took my hand, her fingers cold. "I believe you," she said softly, and something in her voice told me she'd heard stories like this before, maybe from Chester, maybe from others. He kept his promise. He kept you safe. The funeral was a few days later, a quiet affair under a grey sky. The town turned out, their faces somber, their whispers filled with talk of the mine's curse, of men lost to its depths. The preacher spoke of Chester's strength, his sacrifice, but he didn't know the half of it. I stood by Mom, her arm around me, her warmth, the only thing keeping me upright. I kept seeing Chester's wink, hearing his voice. "Long as I'm breathing, I've got you." I wondered if he'd known about those creatures, if he'd seen them before, if that's why he'd been so quiet about his work. The mine never reopened. The company called it a safety hazard, sealed the entrance with concrete, and left the valley to its silence. I heard whispers over the years, old miners talking about strange noises, shadows that moved in the dark, tunnels that went too deep. No one mentioned creatures, not outright, but their eyes told me they knew more than they said. I never went back, never wanted to, but the mine stayed with me, its darkness a weight I carried, a shadow that lingered in my dreams. That's the story, son. The first of many, I think, though I don't know how much time I've got left to tell them. I've seen other things since then, things I'll record if I can, things you need to know about our blood, our town, the shadows that live in places like the Quinnimont mine. I hope you hear this. Hope you understand why I'm telling you now. I'm sorry I won't be there to see you grow up, to guide you through the world's hidden corners. But if you take one thing from this, let it be Chester's promise. You're our blood, and we'll always have you, even from beyond.